Welcome to Inside the Mavs, the official Mavericks podcast of 97.1 The Freak. Kevin Gray, Mavs Pre and Post Game host on 97.1 The Freak on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. Joined as always by my partner, Grant Afseth, Mavs Sports Illustrated beat writer for the Dallas Mavericks. Really appreciate you joining us, however and wherever you may be listening to us or watching us, whether it be on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts for free. You can also watch on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports. You can also watch on Grant's channel at Grant Afseth. A lot to get into today. The Mavericks on a 4-game winning streak after dispatching of the Los Angeles Lakers on Tuesday night. Dante Exum continuing his strong play in support of Luka Doncic, Tim Hardaway Jr. during the same. A lot to get to on this episode of Inside the Mavs. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. You can find Grant on Twitter at Grant Afseth as I bring in my partner on the show. Grant Afseth has been traveling with this team, was at the AAC last night. Grant, how we doing today, man?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm glad to have at least a little bit of time before the next one, for sure. There's a lot of games in a short period of time this week.
That's right. The Mavericks get back on the floor on Thursday when they welcome in Rudy Gobert and the Minnesota Timberwolves. But before we get there, let's look back on this 4-game winning streak for the Mavericks, capping it off with a 127-125 win on Tuesday night as they defeat the inaugural in-season tournament champion Los Angeles Lakers, despite the fact that the Lakers got a combined 70 points from LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Luka Doncic got a lot of support, namely from Dante Exum, who scored 17 of his 26 points in the fourth quarter alone. Tim Hardaway Jr. in his return, as he's been dealing with back spasms, had 32 points, taking 3 charges as well during the game for the Dallas Mavericks. But a lot to get into as far as what has happened over these last 4 games. But we'll start obviously with last night, Grant. What stood out to you most about what the Mavericks were able to do to get the win against the Lakers?
Yeah, I think overall, like without Kyrie Irving against the Lakers, they're going to be very aggressive, really loading up on Luka. But I thought they were even in recent matchups where Kyrie was available to play. So I think, that's just an intensified version of their defensive strategy, really loading up, one pass away, sending doubles, all that good stuff, mixing things up throughout the game. And I just thought, the Mavericks had a great way of countering it with, a lot of spot up guys knocking down shots, but then also Tim Hardaway Jr., to his credit, Dante Exum as well. They were aggressive in putting the ball on the floor, more so Exum, being able to create for teammates and having that mix of, extra threats, even when Kyrie's not available, makes a big difference. But I thought another factor in it as well, it wasn't as prevalent throughout the entire course of the game, but mostly at the very beginning and then, towards the end of the game, I thought where, Derek Lively was a good release valve directly for Luka as well, but sprinkling in his short roll passing after he had those first two, hook out of the post early on in the game was a good sign of his continued development as that release valve. So I just think overall, when you have the big in the middle that can handle the 4-on-3 and is continuing to grow as a scorer in those situations, along with already having the passing ability, with shooting threats that are ready to shoot and can also make some plays, off the dribble or get the ball really popping more and more. I think there's just a lot to like about how they can, continue to build on that. And that's without, a reigning NBA All-Star starter in the lineup that was brought in to be able to really change how the team operates against those types of defenses. So a lot to like, for what I saw.
Yeah, and I think what stood out to me most, and we'll obviously talk about him throughout the course of our show today, the aggressiveness of Dante Exum and the confidence that he's shooting the basketball with, especially from the three-point line. And that's something that the Mavericks have talked about over the last couple of games, and Exum himself particularly is being more aggressive when he has those open opportunities to take shots from the three-point line. And you saw that in the game against the Los Angeles Lakers, making, I believe, a career-high 7 3-pointers in that game against Los Angeles. So that's just been another added dimension to what the Mavericks have done through their first now 23 games is you're seeing the confidence grow in Exum. Now the Mavericks are 4-0 when he's a starter in the lineup for them, and he is providing a lot on both ends of the floor, whether it's getting up and down the floor in transition, providing length on the defensive end, but now the next element of his game, knocking down wide open three-pointers, and you're going to get a lot of those looks when you're playing alongside Luka Doncic. I think that to me is what's standing out, especially over the last couple of games, is the aggressiveness at which Dante Exum is taking those 3-pointers, but more importantly, making those shots that he's taking for this team now.
Yeah, definitely. I think as the game started to wind down, especially like as you mentioned with the 17 of his 26 points in the fourth quarter, the Lakers were very like evident in their approach, like really trying to load up like at the nail against Luka. And Austin Reeves even mentioned after the game, he basically said like that was our game plan, and you just have to tip your cap to somebody like Exum who hasn't been shooting it well on the season, but really made us pay. And that's just sometimes you live with that reality. But how Exum can continue to build on that will be fascinating, because I think even without his 3-point shooting being at a high level as it has been over the last couple of games, especially last game, he's been a very reliable option to attack the paint, draw help and make a play with his passing ability. And that's when he started his NBA career. That's stuff that really was the draw of what he provided as a player. And there hasn't really been many options alongside Luka throughout his career with that size alongside him in the backcourt to be able to provide and really take pressure off of him when they do need to, like, not rely so much on shooting and get downhill and create plays. Like, I thought like there was a play, not this Lakers game, but against Memphis, where the game started to really kind of like slow down in the second half, and like it was a lot of physical wear and tear on Luka with them like face guarding him, full court pressing, all that stuff without Kyrie to pick things up. Exum pulled out, like retreated back to the 3-point line, redrove, and then just kind of threw a hook pass after drawing help to Lively for an alley-oop. And I was just like, in real time, I was like, whoa, that was a really impressive play. Like, how often have you seen those guards that like you see with size, like Frank Ntilikina? You would not get that from a guy like that, but you are getting defensive impact that you hoped from that type of option that they've tried. And he's checked a lot of boxes in those attempts from recent players. And it's just fascinating because he's the one that wasn't in the NBA like for the last couple of years. Yeah. And he's putting it together, and he's still, like, as we've talked about, he's still adding layers to it, where like in Portland after that game, he said there's still threes I'm turning down after he had like a couple late like pivotal threes in the corner where Luka found him and trusted him. He said, I need to be more aggressive. The coaching staff, the players, they keep telling me I need to shoot more. And then, against teams that are going to really load up on Luka and force that issue, now he's even more aggressive taking those threes, and the results are paying off. So as long as he can continue to execute and have that process of being aggressive, I think there's just a ton to like about what he can provide and build on. And we're like basically past the quarter mark only. Like, there's a lot of basketball left to be played to keep building on that progression. So there's going to be a lot of things to think about, especially when Kyrie comes back with the lineup combinations, because when you have that amount of perimeter size, skill all in one, and you're not sacrificing defense like you did, with a guy like Spencer Dinwiddie in that like bigger guard role last year, there's a ton of things that you can do with that.
And that's one thing that's been interesting for me, is the depth of this team has been tested, quite severely over the last several games, and guys are responding, whether it be, Dante Exum, AJ Lawson at times. You saw Tim Hardaway come back to the lineup, but Jaden Hardy even getting some opportunities as well. Rashawn Holmes getting some other opportunities. This team has had to deal with significant injury so far. And you mentioned with Kyrie Irving, who's dealing with a heel contusion, prior to the game against Los Angeles, he was seen with crutches and a walking boot. So that gives you an indication that it's going to be a little bit before Kyrie returns. But I think that's one thing that we're going to be watching for, me in particular, is once this team starts to get healthy again, what do those rotations start to look like? Because right now, Derrick Jones Jr., he's dealing with a bruised quad injury. We'll see what his availability will look like against the Timberwolves on Thursday. But once these guys get healthy, there's going to be some conundrums about what starting lineups they're going to put out there and some of the flexibility and versatility that they'll be able to have, especially if Exum will continue to play this way. Because right now, this team is looking really good with him as a starter, and he's seamlessly been able to jump into this lineup without there really be any kind of drop-off. In fact, elevated play, especially on both ends of the floor in that way.
Yeah, definitely. I think, when you look at the options that they've had, to put at that 3 spot, alongside Luka and Kyrie, I think Exum provides the most like boxes checked, if you will. Like, Josh Green can put the ball on the floor, get to the rim with his athleticism, but I think you see more control and playmaking. I guess you could say like reliability with Dante. He's more patient, more
Mm-hmm.
seasoned, which you'd expect from a 29-year-old compared to someone who's much like quite a bit younger than him in that
Sure.
regard. So I think just the timing for a win now team to have that more polished option definitely is very intriguing to have. And I think you don't really have as much skill offensively in the half court when you do have that combo that they like to use with Derek Jones and Grant Williams. You kind of get into spots where the opposing team is putting their five on on Derek Jones, and he's not necessarily going to be the type of player to put the ball on the floor and really punish that often. You can do some things, and he can beat him with speed at times and on cuts and all that stuff, but on a consistent basis, you're not going to probably rely like you can with Exum, because it's basically like almost like an unfair like cheat code in a way, where you have a really
Mm-hmm.
big guard who's 6'6". Like, that's not really something you necessarily have from a lot of teams, especially when you already have a 6'7" guard like Luka. So I just think overall that's a calling card that not a lot of teams can rival, and that can pose a lot of matchup problems. And that's what you need to be a high level team in the NBA, is like an identity that really poses matchup problems. Because three perimeter players that are threats like that, who also two of those three, like alongside Luka, can really push the pace, like with Kyrie and Exum. That's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the identity that the team is looking for, all in the supporting like impact on the perimeter. And that's not even getting into the continued development of Lively on both sides. And then also when Grant Williams is hitting threes as well, that's a lot of problems. So for the opposing team. So as you said, like, oh yeah. So I think overall, as you said, you kind of factor in the different like first unit, second unit decisions that you have to make. There's a lot to like about, whether you go one way or another. Even like say you bring a guy like Derek Jones off the bench, that still helps you play fast throughout the course of a game. If a team is starting to wear down after, having to account for all that talent in the first unit, then that's where Derek Jones can really like start to leak out and make them pay and things like that, and still have that defensive versatility. So just like little examples of things you can look at that are good things to have on a team that last season didn't really have that luxury of having depth to make those different choices and have positive results.
Yeah, and we saw the return of Grant Williams in the game against Los Angeles, where he had 19 points. He knocked down 5 3-pointers in the game. That was really good to see, because we knew, coming into the year that was something he would be able to provide. And through the first 6 or 7 games, he was knocking down threes at about a 50% clip. So it was good to see his shot come back, against Los Angeles. And now going forward, he continued to build some consistency there, because they're going to need him not only on the defensive end, but as another guy who can knock down open shots when the opportunities present themselves. So Grant Williams coming back, I thought, was a huge boost for them. And I got to give a real special shout out to Tim Hardaway Jr., because, him dropping 32 points in the game against the Lakers, continuously putting his body on the line, taking 3 charges in the game, and doing all the little things to help this team be able to win, which is always a close game, it feels like, between the Mavericks and the Lakers. Tim Hardaway Jr., dealing with the back spasms, has been in and out of the lineup, as far as the rotation is concerned over the last few games. But I thought he gave them a real emotional boost, but more importantly, a defensive one, with some of the charges that he took, really being able to shift some of the momentum, throughout the course of the game. Tim Hardaway, I thought, was really, really good against Los Angeles, and he gets a lot of credit for the professionalism that he's continued to show, especially looking like a legitimate, now as we got enough of a sample size, he's a legitimate 6th man of the year candidate at this point, I feel like, for the Mavericks going forward here.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot to like about, as you said, taking all those charges, something that he takes pride in, back from his Michigan days that he's kind of carried through throughout his career. That's not something you see a ton from a lot of players, but he's definitely got a real knack for it. And, overall, like, while he does sacrifice some size against some bigger perimeter players, he's going to like at least compete and, give as much resistance as possible as he can. And I thought, like, offensively, there's just a lot to like about what he's done this season. He's one of the few like really ultra aggressive catch and shoot guys that are on the team. Like, some of the other guys will turn down those shots that come his way, but Tim Sometimes people can get frustrated with the aggression, which he like takes those shots. Like sometimes if you're getting like 10 up, not all of them are going to be awesome shots, but there's a value to that, to being one of those really aggressive shooters that's going to let it fly on the catch, even if there's like a solid contest. Because if the team's not really in a rhythm, and some of those lead to him getting on a heater, that's been one of the big swing factors for the team over the last, like, basically since last season, especially. So having that, and then also having a healthy offseason, I think has helped him to be more effective off the dribble. And that's an area that he struggled last year, but he's been much more effective this year. And that just really, adds a helpful dynamic, especially when you have, not right now with Kyrie being out, but in a, traditional setting where they have their players available, Kyrie at least can push the pace and get him going in spots where, he really likes the ball and can attack the paint with an advantage. And he's made the most of it throughout the season for sure. And along with everything that he normally does alongside Luka.
Offensively, this team has been spectacular. They've scored at least 120 points now in their last 5 games. They scored 120 in the loss to the Oklahoma City Thunder, when they lost 126-120. But each of the last 4 games they've obviously won, including a 50-point beatdown of the Utah Jazz when they won 147-97. Offensively, this team has no problem with Kyrie, without Kyrie, with Luka, without Luka. And for me, I give credit to Luka as well, because he's played heavy minutes over the last 5 games. I believe now 4 out of the last 5 games, he's played at least 41 minutes in those games, including logging over 43 minutes in each of the last 2 games. So Luka's carrying a heavy load, but you're seeing his conditioning be where it needs to be. And you talked about the pace of play that they've embraced throughout the season. He's been spearheading that, and he's, again, physical conditioning seems to be, where it needs to be going forward, because he's carrying a lot right now for this offense, but it's paying off given the offensive output that we've seen from this team over the last several games at this point.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, honestly, the last stretch of games watching him play, like especially, up close, like seeing all the little details of the hits that he takes throughout those 44
He gets beat
minutes,
up. He gets beat up a lot.
He does. Like I was right by the floor. And that's not like I got great seats brag or anything, but like seeing David Roddy just check him, like that's a big guy. That's a big boy.
Saying,
yeah. Like the actual like the size, the frame of all those guys really stands out when you're close. And just like him getting checked to the floor, and then like seeing like the things that aren't shown when you're watching on TV, like him kind of like grimacing and holding his back and walking to the bench and then getting checked out, all that stuff. Like he's playing through a lot of like contact, a lot of ailments. And, he was listed as questionable for that Lakers game, and he still played on the second out of a back-to-back. And last season, around this part of the year, they were already doing the whole like resting on that second out of a back-to-back. And they were 0-7, I believe, in their first, before that win, right as the trade happened for Kyrie, where the agreement was made, and Josh Green and Jaden Hardy had big nights against Utah and finally got that first win without Luka on one of those second out of back-to-backs. So I think just overall, like that's just a big difference in what this team has been able to provide on a consistent basis, is having Luka not only available on the second out of back-to-backs, but he's played through a lot of stuff, and the rest of the team has followed him. And I think, honestly, personally, I think he deserves like very serious MVP, love and consideration as a result of that, because there's not many players that are really putting a team on their back quite like Luka on a night-to-night basis and taking the hits and delivering the results that he's providing.
Yeah, and the amount of physical punishment that he normally takes, it seems like has been ratcheted up over the last several games, but he's been dealing with it even to the tune of getting a couple of technicals. But at the same time, that's just part of the whole Luka experience at this point with Luka Doncic as a player. But he has shouldered that load, taken the physical punishment, but more importantly, he has continued to produce, and the amount of open looks that he continues to generate for his teammates has been spectacular given what his teammates have been able to do in knocking down shots. I mean, knocking down 21 three-pointers against the Los Angeles Lakers on 43 attempts, shooting nearly 49% from deep. That's an absurd number. Now, they gave up, nearly 52% on the other end in terms of the three-point shots that the Lakers are taking, but that's an anomaly because the Lakers don't necessarily take a bunch of 3-pointers, so and make them at a necessarily a high rate. So at the same time, it is something important when it comes to the Los Angeles Lakers being able to handle their business, knocking down shots, but you give the Mavericks credit for being able to move forward and still dealing with that. Defensively, though, this team has still got some things to work on, given what they've been able to do in terms of this 4-game winning streak. Where do you still see some improvement where the Mavericks need to make based on what they've been doing on the defensive end?
Yeah, I definitely think having Exum in the starting lineup has been a good step forward to have another plus defender that you can rely on that's not going to frequently get into foul trouble and will pick up full court and be aggressive against quicker guards and handle bigger matchups as well. Having that type of talent helps. And I think getting Grant Williams back and then however they're going to utilize the wings as well, like Derek Jones when he's returned. That gives them more depth as well. And overall, Derek Lively's continued development will be a key factor. I think, he's continued to show some strides in that area, but, still early on in his overall career where they're really trying to ice ball screens and, kind of keep it basic, not really mix things up a ton throughout games. And I think, as he sees teams multiple times, as he did yesterday, that's going to be able to help the Mavericks kind of build upon their game planning efforts. And he's going to get more familiar with, okay, Anthony Davis, he can get to this spot this quickly and his, wingspan, he's going to get the hook off this way. And, he can, I can't let him get to that mid range. Oh, he can pick and pop, hit the three, all those little things like that. You really start to learn playing guys multiple times, reading the scouting report numerous times and watching the film. So I think that naturally will lead to, continued improved results. And, just as a group, getting healthy and having continuity to continue to familiarize and, really hone in on details alongside each other will be important because they've had, guys in and out of the lineup, as we've talked about. And that's harder to really get into a flow where you can really come to expect what, the guy next to you is going to provide and everyone can get comfortable in those bigger roles. Even Grant Williams, who's, spent a good amount of time in the NBA, even though he's only 24, or now 25, I should say, because he had his birthday recently. He's someone that's taking on a lot larger of a role in his own right. And he, started off really well shooting the three, but he's been an integral part of the defense, relied on as a leader. And that's something he's still going to have to get used to. Not only just Derek Lively getting used to the NBA. And those 4 and the 5 spots are very super important for a defense because they're the back end. They communicate. They have a lot of responsibilities. And I think those two being new to the team and circumstances at the same time is a challenge. And I think we saw that early on. And just seeing how they continue to build on it around them will be important. I think Exum being in that unit has been helpful. Overall, because of the steady-handedness, as we already talked about, having that reliable contribution, that seasoned outlook and way of making that impact with all the attributes he brings as well. I think that really elevates things, and I think that's going to be something to kind of watch going forward because we still haven't seen the leap defensively that we wanted to see from Josh Green, and I think you do give up some talent that and offensive impact in terms of the things that we've already talked about when you don't have Exum on the floor in place of someone like Derek Jones. So I think overall it'll be interesting to see how they continue to build. But right now it's still early for everyone in that process, relatively speaking, who's continuing to acclimate themselves and build on their roles in new situations.
I mean, if you had told me this team would be 15-8 after 23 games, top 3 in the West, a top 5 offensive rated team, a team that's still top 10 in terms of pace, still figuring things out defensively, given some of the new personnel that they have and the injuries that they've been dealing with, you would take that if you're a Mavericks fan, now knowing that the schedule is going to get a little bit tougher. I thought they played with a lot of energy, especially against the Lakers in the first half. They felt like they were the team that had been off for the few days versus the Lakers who had been off, since Saturday after winning the in-season tournament. So I think there's a lot to like given what this team has been able to do, overcoming some of the injuries, and now us getting introduced to some of these other players who've had to play a big role, more so than what we thought they might have had to coming into the season, namely being Dante Exum, who's been the star of this show, much like he was the star of the show, against the Los Angeles Lakers. And now as they get ready to take on, the Minnesota Timberwolves, on Thursday, they're playing one of the best defensive teams in the NBA, led by multi-time defensive player of the year, Rudy Gobert. They got, a lot of guys with athleticism, namely Anthony Edwards, of course. Karl Anthony Towns, one of the better shooting big men in the league. Minnesota presents a lot when it comes to the versatility that they present. What are you looking at as far as that matchup is concerned with the Mavericks taking on the Timberwolves on Thursday?
Yeah, I think definitely you're going to have to see how they handle Anthony Edwards. He's been really electric, and he can get downhill in a hurry with his explosiveness. And how they manage to counter that will be important. They're going to have to be tied together as a unit. Lively will have to provide that rim presence or lane presence, I should say, to deter those drives, pressure him deep. Grant Williams will have to be ready to help. All those, the whole unit will have to be ready to make extra efforts. And I think, just the way they handle the size combination that Minnesota has, as a front court, like with Karl Towns and Rudy Gobert, that's a big size difference for a 6'6" power forward to have to handle. And I'm also just generally curious because this is a team they played twice in Abu Dhabi, the first NBA action, structured NBA action that, Derek Lively was able to experience. So how he kind of handles those matchups, seeing these guys for an additional time after seeing other NBA matchups as well will be important. And also another factor, Jaden McDaniels has usually been one of those tougher on-ball defenders that's really pressured Luka as well. So this is going to be a great stress test, if you will, for the Mavericks, where they've faced a lot of teams that have picked up Luka full court, face guarded him off the ball, really been physical with him, and that's not going to change. And now they're going to face a team. While they had the Grizzlies with Jaren Jackson with that help presence as a dynamic threat, they're going to now have it as at the 5 with a 7-footer anchoring the paint with Rudy Gobert. How they hunt matchups will be important as well. The Mavericks are very, matchup like hunting oriented offense where they really try to target somebody. So how the Timberwolves hide Karl Towns will be another element as well. So overall, there's a lot of interesting elements for both teams to kind of consider and view this as a good measuring stick for themselves. And I'm just very curious to see how it all plays out. And I look forward to picking it apart after it happens for sure.
Yeah, Timberwolves 17-5. They are 8-2 in their last 10. Mavericks 6-4 in their last 10 with that 15-8 record. Now 7-4 at the American Airlines Center. The Timberwolves are a big athletic team that's got a lot of length and a lot of size. Obviously, with Rudy Gobert, averaging 13 and 12 on the year. Karl Anthony Towns, you mentioned Anthony Edwards. They've got a lot of guys that have a lot of versatility. This is going to be a real test for the Mavericks, especially as we mentioned, dealing with the injuries that they're dealing with. And for Derek Lively in particular, two big men who've got a lot of skill. Karl Anthony Towns on one end in terms of his offensive game. Rudy Gobert, we know what kind of stalwart he is on the defensive end. Interested to see how Lively responds to what the challenges will be on both ends of the floor for him as far as his game is concerned, because he's going to be tested in a lot of different ways. Luka's going to do what Luka does and get what he's able to get. But can these guys knock down shots on the outside and continuously push pace to put the Timberwolves in a little bit of a bind when it comes to them getting up and down in transition? So should be a really fun game. I'm actually really looking forward to this one because, for the Mavericks to be at this spot with the contributions that they've got from certain guys, they've really been able to put themselves in a nice little spot here to be able to have a nice marquee matchup against a Timberwolves team that has surprised a lot so far this year with the quality of play that they have. That game will tip off at 7:30 p.m. at the American Airlines Center. I'll have the pregame show beginning at 7 p.m. on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network on 97.1 The Freak. Grant, tell the folks so they can find you. What you got going on, man?
Yeah, for sure. I have a lot of coverage on DallasBasketball.com, between before and after every game. If you miss a game, you can get caught up on the recap and everything, and a lot of the comments that are made as well by players and just a lot of stuff in general. So you can find that there. And I'll have, plenty of content on YouTube as well with the press conferences and, hopefully some film breakdowns. The schedule gets pretty tough sometimes to be able to get too much of that up there, but definitely some things like that throughout the season for sure.
Definitely check out all of Grant's coverage on YouTube at Grant Absteth and especially on Twitter as well. Does a terrific job covering this team for Sports Illustrated, traveling with the team at every single game, asking really, really good questions, getting a lot of great answers and insight from everyone as far as the Mavericks are concerned. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. Subscribe to Kevin Gray Sports here on YouTube as well. And make sure you follow Inside the Mavs on Twitter at Inside the Mavs. You can download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free, including iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Make sure you give the podcast a 5-star rating and write a review of it while you're there. We'll be back on Friday to recap the game on Thursday between the Mavericks and the Timberwolves as we get ready for more Mavericks basketball this upcoming weekend. So until then, for Grant, I'm Kevin. This is Inside the Mavs. Appreciate you joining us, and we'll talk to you on Friday right here on your favorite Mavericks podcast, Inside the Mavs. Y'all be good. Peace.